What's up guys, Jay here and welcome to the final video in our DeepRockGalactic mission guide series, where we go over the premise of each of the various mission types and talk about what to expect in them, as well as what the classes can provide in terms of completing them. Today, in our last video in this series, we will be covering the point extraction mission type. We're going to cover the basics of what the process of completing a point extraction is like, the finer details that come with it, and some recommendations and guidelines on how to play each class in this particular mission. Lastly, we'll talk about the overall difficulty of point extraction missions and how it compares to the other types in the game. So if you guys are ready, let's finish this series strong and talk about the last mission on our list, the point extraction mission. By the way, if you want to see more gaming videos, subscribe to the channel, that way it's easier to find my content.
Our scanners have picked up a massive deposit of a quark. We're sending you in alongside a heavily armed lifter to get as many out as possible.
So you're going through a point extraction mission in DeepRockGalactic. Well, these missions are not quite as complex as some of the other types in the game, like industrial sabotage or salvage operations. However, it is still a fun mission type to go through. The main goal of a point extraction mission is to collect the required amount of large blue crystals known as quark gems and deposit them into the central mine head for extraction. That may seem simple enough on the surface, and it essentially is, but depending on where you find the gems, it can take some time. Also, the fact that you don't have Molly on these missions to deposit means you have to haul the gems back to the mine head by hand, which can be time consuming. Ultimately, these missions are not that difficult, but depending on a few factors such as gem placements and team coordination, the mission could take anywhere from a few minutes to complete or way too long to complete.
The quarks can be extracted from the walls. Search for a blue shimmering light.
As I said previously, point extraction missions are not necessarily too difficult on the surface, but they have several factors that can affect how much trouble you have. So to help you go through these missions, let's go over the things you need to know. First, like every mission type, it's good to know just how many objectives you have. As usual, there are parameters that are determined by the mission length and cave complexity. In the case of point extraction missions, these determine the number of quark gems you need to collect, which can be anywhere from 7 to 10. The next thing to keep in mind, as always, is the kind of layout that the cave system has on these missions. Point extraction missions take place in large, expansive, open caves with various height levels. They always have at least one small tunnel that leads to a medium-sized cave. Keep an eye out for this cave because not only is it hard to find, but it can also be a good spot to find multiple quark gems. The mine head will always be positioned in the general center of the main room, and it has sentry turrets stationed attached to it that can help you defend your position. Now that you know where to go, it's time to talk about the actual objectives themselves and how to find and collect them. The quark gems that you need to find are embedded in the walls of the cavern. You can see small blue glowing crystals dotted in the locations that they are buried in, and they must be dug out using the pickaxe or other terrain destroying tools or weapons. The gems themselves are counted as heavy objects, meaning that they need to be physically carried by hand and brought to the central mine head. That's all there really is to the basic premise, but what makes this mission so varied in terms of how long it takes to complete is just how lucky you are when getting the spawning of the gems. There are plenty of times where the majority of gems are literally just directly in the ceiling of the caves, and if you don't have a scout-engineer combo, getting them is just going to be a pain. Another thing to keep in mind is the enemy spawning during these missions. Swarms in this mission type essentially play out the same as a regular swarm. However, throughout the mission, waves will be spawned in at timed intervals. These waves continually increase in size, potentially reaching a point where the previous wave had not been dealt with before the next one spawns. Simply put, you don't want to take too much time in completing these missions because eventually the enemies will start to overwhelm you. After you've collected all the required number of gems, a button on the minehead platform will appear and it can be interacted with to launch the minehead rocket to mission control, where they will send a drop pod to extract the players after the rocket has been secured to the space rig. The drop pod will take a few minutes to arrive, after which the pod will land and open for a couple more minutes before departing. At this point, all you have to do is fight your way to the drop pod, make your way, and leave.
Escape pod will arrive when minehead has been secured.
So now that you know the essentials of completing a point extraction mission, let's talk about how you can actually achieve that goal using each of the classes, as well as if any specific class has an incredibly useful position in regards to utility. These missions are kind of finicky because they can be made very easy if the entirety of the team is well coordinated. Now this is true for every mission type of course, but for these ones specifically, they are made very easy when everyone knows what they are doing. Personally, I would say that the scout and gunner have the most that they can provide to completing these missions. But with that in mind, let's go through each class and talk about the kind of utility they provide, as well as if they do anything special for these missions. The driller can be useful for this mission, however the bulk of his utility is largely dependent on the layout of where the gems are. If the majority of them are in the ground or close to the ground level, he can easily dig them up using his drills or satchel charge. If they are in the ceiling or in the upper levels, however, then he is going to struggle a bit. Even if that is the case, he could still do a great job at controlling the enemy swarms with his wide area weapons and equipment. The flamethrower can do good work at cooking the enemies, and the wave cooker can chain between various enemies to help keep the swarms under control. The gunner can provide a lot in terms of utility and aid in these missions. First, as always, his ability to mow down enemies can always be a huge help at keeping the team safe and sound. His rocket pod is good at hitting things from a long range, which is good if your plan is to just defend the central minehead. However, his most useful tool for these missions has to be his zipline gun. He can set up multiple lines branching out from the minehead towards areas like a spider's nest where there are multiple gems locations. This gives the whole team an easy travel network to get to the gems and then get back to the minehead safe and sound. The Scout has probably the biggest use in these mission types. Because there is a lot of moving around the map quickly and getting to very hard to reach places, the Scout can use his trusty grappling hook to make this process significantly simpler. Also, thanks to the fact that these missions are located in a large central area, his flares can light up the entire area very easily. For weapons, the M1000 and crossbow are nice picks here because they have very long range and very wide sightlines, allowing you to pick things off from a distance. Finally, the engineer has a lot that he can provide to the team in terms of completing these missions. First, since the majority of these missions take place near the central minehead, he can simply set up his sentry guns on the central platform, leave them, and they will most likely cover most of the area needed. He can also make great use of his platforms, whether for helping the Scout get to those hard-to-reach gems in the ceiling, or to help the gunner in setting up a zipline network. For weapons, the Smart Rifle and Shard Diffractor are good picks for their wide range and good accuracy. Now that we've covered each of the classes individually, let's go over a basic setup. The Gunner and Scout should prioritize making it as easy as possible to collect the Aquatic Gems by creating direct and easy pathways in order to collect them. Meanwhile, the Drillers should try to collect any gems that can be easily found on the ground floor, as well as keeping the enemies under control. Finally, the Engineer can be a floater and assist whoever needs it the most with his platforms and defense. Remember that these roles are not set in stone, and if you feel the situation calls for it, you can always adapt.
Minehead returning. Escape can inbound.
Now that we've covered the basics of the point extraction mission and talked about how the classes function in it, let's talk about where the point extraction stands when compared to the other mission types. Remember that each mission type gets 3 different ratings, one for difficulty, one for how fun it is, and one for its complexity, each with a value of 1 to 5, with 1 being low and 5 being high. Remember again that these ratings are only my personal take on this, so if you think it should be higher or lower, that's perfectly fine. First, in terms of difficulty, I'm going to give it a 3. The difficulty of this mission is largely dependent on the spawning of the gems, but overall it's not too terrible if everything goes right. If your team is working well and everyone is doing what they need to do correctly, then the process is actually relatively easy to manage. Next, in terms of complexity, it's going to get a 2 here because there isn't really any wild or crazy complex process to complete these missions. They are more closely similar to missions like mining expeditions or egg hunts. Simply find the gems, collect them, bring them back to the minehead, and then leave. Finally, for the enjoyment rating, I'm going to give it a 2 as well because while I do enjoy going through these missions, they don't have that same kind of charm or interest factor that missions like sabotage or salvage missions have. They are simple to clear but feel rather basic. But hey, sometimes simple and basic is a nice change of pace. Well, that covers essentially everything that you need to know about going through a point extraction mission, and hopefully now you have a better understanding of what goes into them. So what do you guys think? Did I miss any details, and did you enjoy this whole series where we covered all the mission types? Let me know down in the comments below. Anyway, I hope you guys found this video helpful. Please be sure to give it a like because it tells me which types of videos you guys want to see. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next Friday for another video.